Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 121st edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you see that unusually we do not have a guest with us this week. And for those on the podcast, our guest who was going to join us was unable to make it, and we've rebooked them for later in the term. So they're coming back, we hope, just before Christmas. But so this week it's just Stan and Frank. So hello, Stan, how are you?
Hi, just thinking very appropriate that it's number 121. When we're doing 121.
Oh, that's so quick, Stan. That's amazing. Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah. What sort of week have you had? I think you've been away. You weren't here last week. You had a fantastic edition last week, Stan.
I understand that. I was also accused of needing to go to Essex because I've been away twice in a year. Yeah, I was in Palma in Mallorca for a city break with some friends, and yes, it was wonderful. No, it's not been good to come back with, in theory, not putting the heating on yet, but having slept in a room where you need the aircon on to keep cool to come back into. So I'm afraid we did give up and put the heating on for a couple of hours.
Oh, right. Well, we've managed to avoid it. But we have a little gas heater in the kitchen area, so we turn that on.
Gather around it.
So we'll huddle around it. And just one thing, I didn't mention it before, but we're away next week, so we're going to be looking for a new co-host. So it'll be the Stan and somebody else. So Stan and I will chat about who we're going to invite after the show. So that'll be a bit of a surprise for them and for our guest who's joining. Okay, so it is whichever government it is. I suppose it's still a Conservative government, whether it's got a different cabinet or a different leader. But they certainly keep on giving for these chats that we've had.
Well, you'd think it was a completely different government by the way they talk, as if we had an election somehow.
Well, you see certain cabinet ministers who think, oh, I was saying that last week or last month, but this month I'm going to give you the completely different view.
Yeah,
what we're doing.
We've had really poor growth for 10 years. Yeah, but that was in your time.
Yeah.
No, it was a new government.
You voted for it though, didn't you? In cabinet, you went out on the airways and supported it. I mean, there comes a point, doesn't there, in everybody's career where you think, actually, I'm selling my soul here to keep myself in a job, and actually you think, I'm not. I mean, in a way that the cabinet members, who I think, without naming them, but I think we all know who they are, who were, cabinet members previously and are now still cabinet members, who voted for something completely different, really should have just scurried back to the back benches and played out a little bit of time there before coming back, because I think they're just in an impossible position because everybody can see straight through it.
Yeah, but doesn't that tell you something about the character of the people that have stayed, if you like, or have been chosen to be in the current cabinet? It must tell you something about their integrity.
And whether there's some self-interest playing out in all of this as well, to do all this, some of them are quite wealthy.
As if there could be.
Oh, yeah. So that isn't what's caught your eye this week, is it?
Well, lots of things have caught my eye this week, but the one thing that really stuck out, and I've printed it off.
A visual aid.
Yeah, that's because I'm not capable of doing it on the computer and sharing the screen.
It would probably take us 5 minutes to set it all up.
And it's this percentage of pupils meeting the expected standard in phonics screening in year 1, 21-22 by birth month, and the headline that went with it in the TES was declining by age, instead of someone looking at it and saying, well, of course, in August, the children born in August are a year younger than those born in September. And therefore, it is very likely that they won't have developed their reading, their phonics as fast as it's talk about, people talk about the bleeding obvious.
But the
But
thing is, though, Stan, that we haven't had a chart, as far as I'm aware, for the Key Stage 1 results, the Key Stage 2
not seen.
results. Actually, I can't recall seeing, but they say for Key Stage 4, I've heard people say that it all balances out when the children are around 13 and 14. I mean, well, can we see the evidence for that? Is probably the question.
Yeah, and we've already made judgments on them long before
Oh,
that.
that, yeah.
So we've put them in boxes and put them in some schools into different sets. In some schools, limited what options they've got. But don't worry, by the time you're 14, it'll be.
I know. See, the thing is also that plays out, doesn't it, in terms of children's perception of how good they are, how
Yeah,
clever they are. If you're in, if I mean, and a lot of this phonics is taught in differentiated groups, so you know fairly early on which group you're in. You might progress up. I mean, they will all say, "Oh, well, you can progress up," but actually, if you are performing at that level, then that sort of gives you a sense of, well, that's where my defined intelligence is. That
yeah,
then feeds into Key Stage 1. I mean, the other thing that it'd be interesting to have this sort of maths, this tables times table test, which they haven't done, but you think, well, it's probably in there as well.
yeah.
Um,
It's just it just emphasizes this, decision many years ago that every child is of a considered to be in the same year group from the 1st of September, and there is 12 months difference in some children. And I was sort of playing with this in my head last night and thinking, well, what if we just tested children on their 11th birthday with their SATs? So can you imagine the uproar if some children were tested in September and some weren't tested till the following July,
yes, yes,
and their results were compared to be against each other?
yeah.
There would be uproar that these children have had an extra 12 months of schooling at year 6, so that they're bound to be better. Well, yeah, but you've got to somehow, we've got to balance that out. We've got to recognise. I know. I think Ken Robinson said we still base our schools on a factory model, that a product comes in at one end and out at the other.
And
And I
stays
think,
in those egg boxes all the way through.
yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I'm not sure. I might be wrong on the author of this. It might be Dan Early, but it might not be. Who did some stuff on outliers, and based on American ice hockey players, noting that the best ice hockey players in the world were born in January or February. And he analysed that and came to the conclusion that I'm suggesting, that if you say the cut-off date for being in this year's team is the
Is
1st of January,
yes,
you have some people who are a year older, bigger, stronger than others, and they're the ones who tend to get picked for games like sports like ice hockey. And so they then get the best coaching because they're the best at 7-year-old. They get the best coaching. They improve more than the others, and
yes.
therefore continue to get the best coaching, and you get this distortion based on a start date. And I'm
I believe
sure,
that was also the case for the England cricket team.
was it?
Apart from the fact they did an analysis of the month they were born, but also whether they went to state or private school, and
Yes,
still
yeah,
private school, you know,
yeah,
it shouldn't be that way. But yeah, there is still a heavy emphasis on those who went to either grammar and private as opposed to non-grammar state. So yeah, the same thing I think played out. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but they did that analysis as well. I suppose it's for most sports, isn't it? I'm trying to think of a sport where it might. Well, I can't
Well,
think of a
it's
sport.
at junior level where people either say we
Yeah.
follow the school year, so it's people in that year group, or they have a date
Yes.
by which it's that, and until the next year, that's your cohort.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, you separate people into a years.
I mean, one of the things to me, it sort of also lends itself to a discussion about whether you stream or whatever you do. If you've got children who perform, for example, somebody born the 1st September does brilliantly well on their phonics screening. They suddenly become enthused by this ability to be able to decode the words. So they then feel as though they're capable. And if that is then sort of reinforced by them being put with children who scored similar results, many of them may well be the oldest children, You end up with a sort of self-fulfilling thing, which is played out, I think, in some secondary schools, particularly, where you're in the top, band or top stream, whatever it is, and you can actually, some of these things are determined so early in your life,
Yeah,
that the ability to catch up is actually a hurdle too far, because actually they're determining a lot of the stuff from a test further down the line where you had a distinct advantage over the other kids.
yeah. I just think, the trouble is you have to overturn everything that we've got in order to change it. I mean,
Mm.
I would suggest a termly cohort, so that children start school in the term after their 5th birthday, let's say. And so, but then you'd have exams every term, you'd have children leaving school every term, you'd have transition to high school every term. But to me, it would seem fairer to have comparison. If you're going to compare children with other children, that's the issue. If you're
Yes.
comparing a
Yeah.
child against their own progress,
You'd
then that's
expect
fine.
it to be fair,
Yeah.
and it's not fair, is it? So
It's
that's
not
why I
fair. I mean,
think,
we used to, summer-born children used to start later,
yeah,
which actually gave them a further disadvantage
yes.
in that the older ones have been in school for 2
But it's
terms.
the quality of that preschool provision as well that
Yeah,
plays into this, isn't it? And I know that, I mean, I heard Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, this morning. I sort of poo-pooed it a bit, really, but then I thought, well, no, there might be something in that about, reduced numbers in primary schools, could free up space for more preschool provision being placed within a primary
yeah,
school setting. The problem is, the quality of the staff.
yeah.
Where
Well,
is the staff?
the
But
other thing that's been, of course, as part of that's now been, we need schools open longer for
yeah,
childcare. That was on
well,
TV this morning.
it was, and that's part of it. I think that's where it originated from.
There was a horrible piece. I wanted to shout at the TV this morning where they said, well, the teachers are too, the teachers work really hard and they're very busy, and extending their day wouldn't be, right. But maybe the TAs, teaching
Oh, yeah.
assistants, that they could run breakfast clubs and after
Yeah.
school clubs, because they're not,
Oh, and there's that we're awash with
yeah,
we're awash with people who are
yeah.
not who are looking for work. We're not, are
Paid
we?
less than supermarket
I
shelf
know.
stackers. It's just, I just find it really
Yeah.
difficult when people just assume that teaching assistants are almost volunteers that can give as many hours as they want. And the reality is, schools would really struggle without
The
TAs
problem is also, Stan,
not
is
paid.
the people asking for that to happen or suggesting that happen would not do the job.
No.
I'm more than happy for a group of TAs to say, we want to step up there. We think we can do that if you pay us at the right level, but we're happy to do that. I don't hear that.
Mm.
I mean, it would be much more convincing if that was, coming from the mouths of teaching assistants or teachers or head teachers who wanted to do that, who felt as though they had the resources to do it. But hey, I don't think the resources, I don't think, just the budget wouldn't work. But also, I think the problem would be because early years is financially, I don't know how some of these settings are carrying on,
No.
but the quality of the staff is not out there.
No. And there's a shortage of people who work for very low wages
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
And that's exactly what's happening.
yeah.
I do get well, if it was attached to a school, that there are definitely some advantages. But there's also this assumption that worries me, that schools as a building is somehow a safe place. But
I know.
I've
It,
heard
it,
people say this over the summer, well, why can't they use the school? Well, because there's a lot to
yes.
safety and learning and teaching and all those other things that go on that aren't dominated by the building. They aren't controlled by the building. It's the quality of staff that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, what's caught my eye this week is I shared with you a photograph of a school gate
Yeah.
last week, and I hope Tracy Harrison, the head teacher, I'm going to send her a link to this, even if she doesn't watch anything else on the Frankistan chat. But Tracy is the head teacher of Thames Primary School in Blackpool, and that in 1995, the autumn term of 1995, that was the first school that Stan and I inspected together, and it was. I have to say, Stan, it was. I mean, there were so many funny things that we saw on that, whether or not it was the blancmange hitting one of the inspectors or whatever it might be, or
Of the child who put a pencil in the backside of an inspector,
correct,
having
or
sharpened it first.
yeah, or the classroom where at the beginning of the lesson all the plastic rulers were straight, but at the end of the lesson all of the plastic rulers were like in the shape of a boomerang. Um, and we laughed our heads off at some of the things we saw, even though it was a very serious event. But there was a lot of adrenaline and a lot of excitement going on. Um, but I actually walked up the stairs at Thames to look at what was our team meeting, and is at the top of the stairs directly
Yeah, I
opposite the
remember.
staff room. But I have to say the transformation in the school is amazing. This Victorian building, I think it's the oldest primary school in Blackpool, but it's been transformed by the trust, the head teachers, the governors, and it's so bright and open. And you know, we talk a lot about the creative arts and that, you know, it's embedded in that school. You know, I
Right.
think you don't need to stay very long there to get a feeling of security and of comfort and of a genuine joy for learning. You know, children, you know, what I really liked was the fact that we went into one of the classes. All of them were on their Chromebooks, all sort of doing their research and whatever, you know, and it was just a fantastic experience to see it, and it's extended, not in terms of the size, but in terms of the range of provision. So they have an early years setting there, which looks amazing, and there's been a great investment in the building, and because of that, a great investment in that community. So I really enjoyed the visit, and I wish you know, we're meeting up with that team later today. That's why it's topical for us for a meal. But I wish we could all revisit and actually see the transformation, you know, so that you could see it as well. So yeah, it was a great visit.
Excellent.
Okay, well, we don't have a guest today, Stan, but I've wanted to do something for a while. You don't know anything about this, and I wasn't going to tell you before because I want to see the shock on your face. Um, I think that there are sort of, you know, we have people who watch and listen to our chats each week, but don't really know very much about you. And I'd like to sort of just go back to think about some of the things that have made you have the educational philosophy or the education philosophy that you have. So I was wondering about, you know, the sort of schooling that you had and what that was like, and whether or not that influenced any of your thinking about, you know, how children ought to learn, or whether it was the complete opposite because it was not a very, you know, pleasant experience. So where did you go to school? Where was your primary school?
My primary school was the school where I'm now a governor, in Boothstown, which was the reason I went to that school was because my sister, who was 3 years older than I was, it was the only school that would take her at 3, and I think my mother needed to get her in school.
So it's quite topical then, isn't it? This
Yeah,
preschool.
well, it wasn't the
And what
nearest
month
school.
was she born in?
October,
Oh, well, there you go.
and I was born in May. So, but it was a small village school then. In fact, in my cohort, there were only 4 children in
Oh,
my
right.
year group.
Gosh.
Not cohort, my year group, there were only 4 children. Um, and now it's a two-form entry, large, successful, outstanding, very good
Is it a
school.
Victorian building?
No, it was a Victorian building when I was there.
Right.
That just probably about 3 or 4 years after I'd left in the 70s, they had a new build
Right.
that continues to be expanded and improved. But the old building is still there and now is a community centre.
So in terms of what were your experiences like there? Do you look back on it with a lot of, you know, joy and
Well, yeah, because this sounds awful. I was one of the clever ones. I got a lot of attention, particularly in reception class. I found some stuff recently. Don't know what I did with it now, but of my fractions that I was doing in the
right.
reception class
In
and
reception.
in reception, and part of my sort of I used to love maths, so you know things like going to church. I would spend time thinking up questions to ask my mum and dad,
Oh,
like,
right.
what's a quarter of a half of a third of 90? And then they'd work it all out, and then I'd go, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong. So maths I used to really like. So I was there until 67. Left there in 67 and
So
went.
did you do the 11 plus?
Yes, I went to grammar school.
Mm.
See, Frank, um, which was a big, obviously a massive change. Bus ride, 2 bus rides away, really. Um, Completely different culture, completely different philosophy. And we hadn't had the best of the last couple of years in primary because the head teacher was very ill and was off for long periods, and we had supply teachers, or from my memory, days when there were no
No
teachers,
teachers. Yeah, I remember those
and we
days.
just used to, get on.
Yeah.
The prefects would organise what we were
Yeah.
doing on that day. Bizarre though it sounds now,
So,
those were what
so when you
happened.
went to grammar school, was it, were you still viewed as a good mathematician, or
Um,
were you overtaken by
my
more
issue
able?
at grammar school was my handwriting was very poor, and that influenced everything from then on. Which is probably it's still
It's
not
still
great,
poor.
but it did because people assume because your handwriting's poor that the content of what you've written is poor.
Yeah.
Um, and we hadn't done things like that in this small village school. It wasn't deemed important. So yeah, I didn't excel at grammar school. I did okay. Um, and I have friends that I've still got now from those days.
Yeah.
But it changed midway through my time there to a comprehensive. Um, Not that it made any difference, I don't think, to what was going on. We just lost some staff who then went to the sixth form college that
Oh,
opened,
right, right.
and then I went on to sixth form to do
Right.
A level.
So how do you think though that those experiences, if at all, well, they must have done, influenced your sort of way that you started teaching? I mean, I think we were, it's probably it's probably quite difficult for people who are training now, or very, or teachers in their 20s or even in their 30s, to think about, well, in those days, things like planning were very important when you were training. But actually, when I became a teacher, nobody asked me for my planning. I
No.
did it, but as I did it over time, it became less and less important. I gave less attention to it. So, I mean, in a way, that influenced my educational thinking, because I could actually try stuff. So, I mean, what about you? How did your educational philosophy develop from that?
I think I very similar, Frank. I, I don't think I was pushed to work very hard when I was certainly at grammar school. There was an expectation that you would do this, but if you didn't do it, it was down to you. So I never felt as under real pressure, and I never felt deadline. And from then on, I've never had deadlines causing me a problem.
Can I just say, I
Listen,
think I can confirm that.
yeah, well,
It
there's
gets done. It gets done.
yeah, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, his quote is, I love deadlines. I love the swishing sound they make as they pass. And when I went to college, I remember going to college and them saying, right, that we have a deadline by which all work has to be given in, and you'll be given that date. And then 2 weeks after that date, there's a second deadline, uh, and you lose 5% of your marks. And then the third, and you might as well have just said to me, "You're only going to work on a 50% chance."
So, in a way, though, just getting back to that philosophy, then, I mean, there is for those who don't know, I mean, I think it's fair to say that your educational philosophy was around a really rich and varied curriculum
Yeah.
experience for the children.
Yeah, whether that was because I didn't get that as a
Mm,
child in a small group uh, in a tiny village school. I don't know. It was certainly relaxed, and it was the culture of the school was very positive. It was a pleasant place to be. I don't think I ever had times when I was worried about going to school.
yeah,
But again, we had such, for a time, we had such a change of teachers who had completely different philosophies and different ways. You know, I remember one teacher who was mad keen on stars, and we had star charts up,
yeah.
and you got a red star and you work for neatness, green stars for
I remember
content,
that as
blue
well.
stars for something else. So at the end of getting a piece of marked work back, you had to try and analyze how many stars you got and what they were
Yeah, yeah,
for, and then stick them up on the chart. Which again, being somebody who was more likely to get stars, was all positive for me. But I never considered those without any stars. And what I do remember is that there were children in the year above who were far better than me at things like English, at writing, at
Mm,
maths, who didn't go to grammar school for some reason or not. And I think about some of those now as you occasionally see them through social media, and you think, I would at the age of 10, I was looking up to you and thinking, wow, you were really good at those things,
mm,
and they didn't get past that 11 plus barrier.
no. It's funny
And
how some
we did no
things.
preparation for it, by the way, Frank.
No,
There was no, I didn't even know the day I went to school
yeah,
that was the day we were doing the 11 plus.
yeah.
They just took four of us out of the classroom and gave us these tests.
I know. I think that I think when you think about the freedom that there was within the experience that I certainly remember at primary school, we won. The school was fairly new because we went to I was in a new town, and so the school had only been there about 6, 7 years, and we went to play a seven-a-side football tournament on the outskirts of London. I remember Trevor Brooking, and the England and West Ham player who was very young at the time, but just signed for West Ham. He presented us with the trophy because we won. But on the Monday, the whole school had a sports day in celebration of the fact that we won this little trophy, only about this big. And then, of course, we were heroes,
Yeah.
and a big thing was made about it. Now I know that there are
I asked
times when
that, Frank, when I was ahead, and we were looking at what we do by way of support people. I had this thing about, well, we've got some children who are really good at maths and really good at English and do fantastic work, but we don't bring them to the front of assembly,
yes,
cheer them, because for some reason that's seen as elitist. If I say, here's such a body whose maths is
yeah,
brilliant and we're going to get him to answer some maths questions now, but the football team and the netball team, regardless, we're up at the front every week. I mean, and it just struck me at one stage that we had this, I don't know, mental block of celebrating children who were good at really what the school was
right,
about, and we praised the sports teams rather than praised academic
yeah.
success.
That's a truism.
Hopefully, we put right, but it was something that I know people were uncomfortable with, because they were saying, well, what about those who aren't quite as good at maths? Well, what about those that don't get in the football team?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's,
yeah. I think it's. I'm not saying that I didn't actually visit your school when you were the head. Or perhaps I did once. I'm trying to remember. But I feel as though we share a similar sort of outlook on this sort of stuff. But I think for me it was around just the completeness of a whole child type thing,
yeah,
and trying to drag out whatever they had, and some of the pleasure has been when you've done something as a head or as a teacher, and for me it's contemporary dance. I think I've mentioned before that that we've got one of my ex students is pupils is coming on as a guest in the new year, who's actually created his own contemporary dance company. you
wow.
know so think, well, that's fantastic. You know, that's really what it's about, because that was his passion and his love, and we gave an outlet for it. So it was really great to be able to do that. But if you're in a narrow field of what education is, you know, where do you get that? You know,
Yeah.
where do you get those opportunities?
I think art was mine. I mean, I did do art at A level and at college, so that was possibly an influence. But I didn't do it at grammar school. I had to drop it in order to do French, I think. Might have
Right.
no, might have done. I didn't do French past that day. Chemistry, I think it was art or chemistry. As a choice.
Well, I think I know we haven't had a guest, but I hope we've given you a little bit of flavour of what Stan's own educational
I
experiences were.
I think my educational experiences, my philosophy came more from two areas. One, my grandma was the head at a hospital school dealing with mostly Down syndrome children. So I spent my sort of family, when my family had occasions, it was usually around what my grandma's school was doing. So I had that influence of working with and being with children with Down syndrome, and seeing the successes they had in my grandma's school. And then when I was about 10, 11, my mother trained as a teacher and became a nursery teacher. And so there was all the influence of early years that way. And then I still say, when I became a head, I had one of the best reception teachers I've ever worked with, one of the best teachers I've ever worked with. And seeing what went on there was just influenced me completely.
Yeah.
That was where it needed to be right.
I think I can agree with that, and I think in terms of learning, being realizing that as the head teacher, you know, your job is to get the best teachers you can, but the environment in which you do that enables them to teach you how you
So
teach. You know,
to turn it on you, Frank, did your teacher training then influence you at all?
not a swap.
If somebody asked me about those 3 years, I would say football, um, pool trophy, winning the college pool competition. Um,
I do remember though. I had a teaching practice at a school quite close to Westminster Cathedral, and we had a rota. Who I saw this rota on the wall. It was ILEA, in the London Education Authority, and the rota was for Fridays who was going to take Friday off as a sick. So I was put on the list. You know, had my and the other thing I remember though was a sense of being able to try stuff.
yeah.
You know, there was a sense of that, but also the lecturers were very good, I have to say, at pointing out failure in the system. And there was a school, for those of you not old enough, called William Tyndale Primary School, where it was pretty clear that the staff had lost control of what was going on. But there was no Ofsted, there was no mechanism, there was no real mechanism for actually stepping in, and this thing was getting really out of hand. And there was I remember a panorama program or a program about it, and we watched that program in a lecture, and the lecturers were very fair, I thought, in just saying, you know, about fairness, things around equity. You know, was there actually, you know, fair? Was this fair for those? You know, and without judging it, you know, they it could easily, because they were quite progressive is probably one way of describing it, but actually they were considering their own sort of progressive approaches and whether they were actually right for every child. And yeah, so I think all credit to them,
Mm.
because also I did a history course there where, you know, it really went for British imperialism. It just, you know, it tore into them, you know, and I still remember that course influencing me greatly about being, you know, not looking at British exceptionalism in that way that we're looking at it now. And you think, well, all of that started for me when I was 21, 22, you know, and well done those lecturers for doing that.
I think the influences I had during teacher training were in the schools that I worked in, and I was lucky to work in 3 schools locally. Very different cultures. certainly the first one where the teachers still spoke to each other in the staff room with the surnames. It was Mr. and Mrs. Suchabody in the staff room, to a very enjoyable one in a school that's, again, a local school, so I won't mention it, but with a very different philosophy, where probably that had a greater influence on me. And then in my final teaching practice, the head teacher at that school went on a cruise with groups of children. But he then took sort of 4 weeks off, I think, at the end of the school year, and they paid me to go in as a student in my first paid job out of school fund to do 4 weeks teaching.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I do feel as though we've got to a position where we're sort of taking quite a lot of joy out of some of the experiences. I mean, I'm. It's not as if all the schools are dull. They're not, but actually there was, there's something's been lost, I think, in terms of those experiences. And I do feel as though assessment, is the way assessment is, it probably rounds off the conversation, Stan, the point that you were making about phonics, at the beginning, assessment has driven out in some year groups the time and the opportunity for the rich experience that I think children need. And I think it's really sad, and actually it makes you wonder, doesn't it, actually, that the research that went in, that's come out recently from the EEF about particular phonics schemes, you think, if we invested all that time and energy into something that's made such apparent little difference, you think it's not worth it.
My question is, what's not been done
Yes.
to allow that, and what have children missed out on in order for the time to be spent on that one particular way of doing things? And I don't want to knock phonics at all.
No, well, there is definitely
really important
there is
building
definitely
block.
a place for it. Don't get me wrong.
Really important building block, but it's not the only building
No,
block.
no. I think one of the things that's sad. I mean, this is getting onto a very long chat now, but one thing that saddens me a little bit is the fact that older children now are still not being given the opportunity to really select text themselves, that they're still quite governed by where teachers think they are within a reading ability. And I remember reading texts that my brother had, because he was infinitely more able, 16 months younger than me, but much more able. And he presented me, I'm trying to remember the book, John Berger, a book which I read and didn't fully understand. But actually, I finished that book. Why did I finish that book? Because it was probably way beyond my comprehension. But actually, I stuck with it because there was something in it at the time. And you think, well, actually, to deprive children of a chance to read a book that they want to read, it may be a tricky read, they don't understand it all. I still think there's a real big place for that, because that's pitching it high, and if a child wants to pitch it high, I'm not going to stop them. I don't want to control their journey up that ladder. If they think they can climb 3 rungs in the next step, you climb those 3 rungs. I'm not going to stop you from doing it.
I remember using the first page, I think, of 1984 with year 6 children as a piece of text to look at and say, how does this make you want to read the book? And then thinking, probably the book is not something that I need you all to know and read.
I did that with The Old Man and the Sea, the Ernest Hemingway, as well, which there's just one half page which isn't appropriate really for a child of 11, but the content of that, so I remember taking that book forward and then just sort of trying to miss those pages out, but actually, that again, you wouldn't normally choose that. But in the hands of I knew the book really well. In the hands of somebody who can do that, you can take any text and make it appropriate for children, within reason. But anyway, okay. Well, I think that's nearly 40 minutes. So anyway, next week we've got hopefully our guest. Our guest has been off ill from work, so we're hoping that our guest who is now back at work, actually feels able to join us. But I will be abroad, So there's a surprise. It's going to be Stan and somebody else next week
Yeah.
to continue the Frankenstein chat. So until then, I look forward to seeing you all. Oh, well, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time, but I look forward to joining Frankenstein chat next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.